Gemini, the truth about your family you didn't want to hear, but need to. Gemini, have you ever felt like the one who knows too much, but says too little? Like you can read the room before words are spoken, yet you carry the weight of truths that no one wants to name? You were never meant to stay silent. In your family, you've always been the one who noticed the energy shift when someone walked in, who caught the flicker of sadness in a joke, the sharpness behind a smile. But from a young age, you were taught, perhaps not through words, but through tension, that knowing too much could cost you connection. So you learned to translate without disrupting, to hold space without asking for it, to shape-shift into what the family needed and not what your soul longed to become. But now, something is shifting. Mercury, your ruling planet, is illuminating your fourth house of origins, memory, and ancestral roots. And what was once hidden is starting to rise. Not to harm you, but to free you. I'm Elizabeth, your guide here at Esoteric Wisdom, and this message is for every Gemini woman who has carried silence like a second skin. If you're feeling the stirrings of discomfort around your family patterns, if old dynamics suddenly feel unbearable, it's not regression, it's revelation. And it's time to listen. Stay with me, and we'll walk through this together, gently, truthfully, and with the kind of compassion that transforms. If this resonates, subscribe and let's begin. Chapter 1. The emotional role you never applied for, but inherited anyway. Gemini, there's a role you've played in your family for so long, you may not even realize it was assigned to you before you had a voice to refuse it. You were the connector, the go-between, the one who could move from one room to another and sense exactly what to say, or what not to say, to keep things calm. But have you ever stopped to ask, when did I become the emotional interpreter for everyone else's discomfort? You see, your gift, your Mercury-ruled sensitivity to words, timing, silence, and subtle energy, was recognized early. But instead of being nurtured, it was used. And not out of malice, but out of unconscious habit passed down through generations. Someone needed to hold the threads. Someone needed to keep the conversation going. Someone needed to sense when a storm was about to erupt and redirect the winds. That someone became you. One of my clients, Claire, a Gemini in her late 50s, once told me, "Elizabeth, I've been the bridge in my family for so long I forgot I was never allowed to be a destination." Her parents relied on her to calm her younger brother when he spiraled into anger. Later, she became the one everyone vented to, siblings, nieces, even her aging father who never apologized but always needed a listening ear. And yet, when she finally spoke her truth, when she asked for time, space, and respect, it was as if her entire identity was called into question. Who was she, if not the fixer? The listener? The one who held her family together with a smile and silence. Claire's story may sound painfully familiar, Gemini, because many in your sign have inherited a family system that praises your intellect but ignores your needs. Your adaptability becomes your prison. Your quick wit becomes your armor. You're always expected to translate the emotional chaos of others, but rarely invited to express your own. And in time, this creates a deep and quiet wound. The belief that your feelings are a burden, that your clarity is disruptive, that your needs are somehow too much or not enough. Mercury, the planet that rules not just speech, but interpretation and movement, is now turning inward. And it's asking you to do the same. This planetary influence is not random. It is a cosmic mirror held up to your family lineage, reflecting back the roles, expectations, and emotional agreements that were never yours to begin with. But here's the truth. You are not here to be a permanent translator for other people's pain. You are here to develop your own language of healing and to speak it, even if your voice trembles, even if the room goes quiet when you do. Because, Gemini, it's not your job to hold the family together by splitting yourself in half. It's time to examine where your emotional energy has been leaking, where your boundaries have been blurred, where your intelligence has been used in service of survival rather than self-expression. You were never meant to live in emotional code. You were meant to write a new one. And that begins with this question: what is the story about your role in the family that you've been telling yourself? And more importantly, who gave you that script? This is not a call to blame. It's a call to awareness. Because when Mercury activates your ancestral house, it's not to shame your roots. It's to help you prune what no longer grows and reclaim what was always yours. Your inner authority, your emotional clarity, your sacred voice. The same voice that was told to be quiet so others could be comfortable. The same voice that has whispered at night, "This doesn't feel fair," even when everything on the outside appeared calm. Gemini, you are not here to be the background narrator of someone else's healing journey. You are here to step out from behind the curtain and say, "This is what I feel. This is what I need. This is who I am." And when you do, something remarkable begins to shift. The family dynamics that once felt immovable begin to bend. Not because you forced them, but because you stepped into a vibration so aligned, so authentic, that the system had no choice but to respond. This is just the beginning. The emotional role you never asked for is ready to be returned. But first, you must name it. You must see it. And you must begin to choose something different. Chapter 2. The silence that shaped you and the truth you're meant to speak. Gemini, long before you had the words for it, you could feel it, the weight of what went unsaid in your family. You learned early that silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a presence in the room, thick and loaded, especially after an argument, a revelation, or one of those invisible fractures that never quite got mended. You picked up on it the way a musician picks up a shift in key. Except in your family, no one acknowledged the change. They just kept going, smiling over pain, skipping past tension, pretending everything was fine. But you knew better. You always did. Because Mercury didn't just give you language, it gave you sensitivity to timing, tone, and tension. It gave you the ability to read between the lines of a conversation and still hear what wasn't being said. And for a while, you thought this was your burden. But it's not. It's your calling. Because, Gemini, you are not here to inherit silence. You are here to interrupt it, with grace, with courage, with truth. I remember a session with a woman named Lydia, a Gemini in her mid-40s, who came to me trembling. She had grown up in a family where conflict was avoided like fire. Her mother brushed everything aside. Her father didn't raise his voice, but he didn't raise his hand in comfort either. They functioned like a well-dressed unit. Smiles for guests, quiet dinners, polite indifference. Lydia became a master of communication. She worked in PR. Everyone thought she was confident. But when her own daughter came to her crying one night saying, "You never say how you feel," something broke open. She realized she had mimicked the same emotional distance she had once resented. Not because she didn't care, but because she never learned how to speak what hurt, only how to manage it. That moment became her turning point. And Gemini, maybe this is yours. You see, silence in a family system is never neutral. It's not peaceful. It's protective. It shields people from discomfort, but also from healing. And when you've grown up surrounded by these subtle, enduring gaps in honesty, it becomes difficult to trust your voice. To believe that saying how you feel won't collapse the room. That asking the hard questions won't cost you the connection you crave. But the truth is this. The silence didn't protect your family. It imprisoned it. It kept the truth locked behind layers of performance. And your gift, Gemini, is not to perform. It's to pierce the veil. To name what's been unnamed. Not to provoke, but to liberate. Mercury's influence in your chart now brings light into the corners of your history. You may find yourself remembering strange childhood moments, a conversation that ended too quickly, a story that was never finished, a look exchanged between adults that felt heavier than the words that followed. These are clues, not memories to avoid, but messages to follow. Because here's what Mercury wants you to know. When you name what was hidden, you do not destroy the family. You invite it into truth. And yet, I know the fear. What happens when you say something and no one agrees? What if they dismiss you, call you dramatic, or worse, silent you again? That's where your evolution begins. Because healing as a Gemini doesn't come just from speaking. It comes from holding your truth even when it isn't echoed back. It comes from knowing that your memory, your perception, your felt sense of reality is valid. And it deserves voice. So ask yourself now, what is the one truth you've been afraid to say out loud? The one that keeps pulsing inside you during family gatherings, quiet nights, or dreams that leave you unsettled. Perhaps it's, I wasn't okay. Perhaps it's, that wasn't love. Perhaps it's, I've never felt safe with you. Perhaps it's simply, I need to speak. You do not need a stage. You need a mirror. And the first truth you speak, Gemini, is not to them, but to yourself. That truth becomes the signal to Mercury, to your ancestors, to your own nervous system that you are ready. Ready to step out of the emotional fog. Ready to be seen, not just as the witty one, the smart one, the peacekeeper, but as the truth holder. And when you do, something ancient begins to soften. The legacy of silence begins to loosen. Because you, Gemini, are not just speaking for yourself. You are becoming the voice for generations who couldn't. You are not the one who breaks the family. You are the one who breaks the spell. Chapter 3. Speaking your need is not a betrayal, it's a homecoming. Gemini, for as long as you can remember, you've been fluent in the language of others' emotions. You could tell when someone needed space, when a conversation needed redirection, when laughter was being used to hide grief. You became a master of tuning in, adjusting, adapting. But somewhere along the way, you lost fluency in your own needs. Not because you were weak, but because you were surviving. And survival, in many families, looks like silence dressed in service. The truth is, when you're the one who keeps the energy flowing, the room light, the family from tipping into chaos, no one thinks to ask how you're doing. They just expect you to be okay. And eventually you stop asking too. You stop believing that your needs matter unless they're useful to someone else. But Mercury, the planet of expression, and your ruling planet, is whispering a different story now. One that begins not with perfection, but with permission. Because speaking your need, Gemini, is not selfish. It's not dramatic. It's not a betrayal of your family's peacekeeping pact. It is the first step back to yourself. I think of Adrienne, a client I worked with 2 years ago. A Gemini in her early 60s, she came into one of my retreats after caring for her mother through a decade of illness. Her siblings lived out of state, offered support in the form of occasional texts and empty promises. Adrienne held it all: doctors, bills, breakdowns, and breakdowns again. Everyone told her how strong she was. No one asked what it was costing her. One morning during the retreat, we sat in a quiet circle and I asked her, "When was the last time you asked for help? Not because you were drowning, but because you were human?"
She cried.
She couldn't remember. That moment was her homecoming. Not because she shouted, not because she blamed, but because, for the first time in decades, she allowed herself to say, "I can't do this alone anymore. And more than that, I don't want to." Gemini, your healing begins when you stop translating yourself for others and begin speaking to yourself with clarity. It's when you ask, without apologizing, "What do I need right now? What would support feel like for me? What boundary would honor my truth? Not just preserve the peace." And I know, there's a part of you that fears, if I speak my needs, they'll pull away. They'll see me as ungrateful. They'll withdraw the love I've worked so hard to earn. But listen to me closely. If love must be earned by suppressing who you are, it was never love. It was an arrangement. And your soul came here for something deeper. You don't have to demand. You don't have to explain. You simply have to name, with sacred clarity, what is yours to carry and what is not. And in that act, you begin to break the chain that says, "Only when I'm useful am I worthy." Mercury wants you to know that true connection begins where performance ends. When you speak with integrity, when you allow others to experience your limits, your truth, your emotion, you create room for real love. Not dependent love, not negotiated love, but rooted love, soulful love. And yes, some may not meet you there. Some may choose the safety of old dynamics. That's okay. Your voice is not a weapon. It's a filter. It reveals who is willing to meet you in truth and who is only ever there to benefit from your silence. So take a breath, Gemini. You've been holding it for years. Then ask yourself this: what am I no longer willing to hide, shrink, or silence to keep the illusion of harmony? Because the family you belong to may never change. but the way you belong to yourself must. And when you do, the real miracle begins. Your energy shifts, your patterns shift, and life begins to reflect something new. Not because others finally understood you, but because you finally did. Chapter 4. When you heal, your lineage breathes differently. Gemini, have you ever considered that your growth doesn't stop with you? That every choice you make to step out of silence, to honor your needs, to speak truth without apology, shifts something far beyond the confines of your own life? It may feel like you're just setting a boundary, or finally allowing yourself to rest, or choosing not to show up to the same old family gathering where you leave feeling unseen. But energetically, something much bigger is happening. You are telling your lineage, this story ends with me. I remember working with Maya, a Gemini woman in her early 50s who had spent her adult life being the emotional safety net of her family. The strong one, the funny one, the one who helped others talk about their feelings but kept hers folded up in the corners of her journal. During our work together, she shared something simple but profound. I'm terrified of becoming a disappointment. And when I asked, to whom? She froze. Because the answer wasn't just her mother or her siblings. It was generations. Generations of women who had survived by keeping their heads down, being useful, asking for nothing. But she wasn't like them, and she knew it. And in choosing to say no, to rest, to feel, to take up space, she wasn't rejecting her family. She was redeeming them. Gemini, you come from a long line of silence, of people who coped by not feeling, who endured instead of healing. But you were born with the gift of language. Not just verbal language, but emotional fluency. The kind that sees patterns and names them. The kind that senses ancestral wounds in holiday small talk. The kind that walks into a room and immediately knows who's holding what pain. And you've likely been gaslit for it. Called sensitive, dramatic, difficult. But all of that was projection because your presence made their denial tremble. And now you're being called into your higher role, not to save your family, but to become the vibration that shifts it. Because when you change your participation in the system adjusts. Not always immediately, not always comfortably, but undeniably. When you stop playing the expected role, when you no longer absorb, explain, or excuse, you become the unexpected variable. The glitch in the generational code. And that glitch? It creates space. Space for the system to rewire itself. You don't have to fix anyone. That's not your job. Your job is to live differently. To choose presence over performance. Rest over responsibility. Expression over expectation. You're not abandoning your family by changing. You're showing them another way is possible. And whether they accept it now or not, your energy plants a seed. Maybe in a cousin. Maybe in your children. Maybe in someone not yet born who one day feels safe to speak because you once dared to. Gemini, this is the ripple of healing. And it's invisible at first. It doesn't come with applause. It might come with resistance, confusion, even silence. But over time, it reveals its power. Your refusal to self-abandon becomes permission for someone else to come home to themselves. Your willingness to say, "This hurts me," allows another to stop pretending they're fine. Your voice, once told it was too much, becomes the lighthouse someone else didn't know they needed. Mercury is now guiding you through this ancestral corridor, not just to free your mind, but to realign your lineage. Through you, the energy is moving. And the more you speak, the more you rest, the more you feel, the more you love yourself in the way you were never taught to, your entire bloodline exhales. You are the living proof that evolution is possible. Not because you were perfect, but because you were present. Not because you saved everyone, but because you saved yourself. And that is more than enough. Chapter 5. You are no longer the interpreter. You are the author now. Gemini, there comes a moment in every healing journey when you no longer look back to see who is following you. You stop waiting for the apology that may never come. You stop rehearsing the truth you wish they'd understand. You stop shaping your voice to fit the room, and instead, you begin to speak like someone who belongs to herself. This is that moment. You've spent so much of your life trying to translate everyone else's needs, managing their expectations, softening your insights so as not to disturb the family peace. But now, Mercury calls you to something deeper, not to speak for them, but to speak for you. Because Gemini, you are never just the messenger. You are the author now, and you no longer owe your family a version of yourself that fits inside their comfort zone. You owe yourself the truth, unapologetic, unedited, undiluted. I remember Carmen, a Gemini woman in her early 60s, who came to see me after years of caretaking and emotional suppression. She had always been the bridge between generations, the one who understood everyone, the one who smoothed over the tension after every family gathering. But after a health scare, one that forced her to confront her own exhaustion, she realized something devastating. She had never let herself be known. She was liked by everyone, respected even. But seen? Truly seen? No. And it broke her heart. But that heartbreak became her freedom. She began to write again. She stopped calling out of obligation. She stopped over-explaining. She started asking, what would feel true to me today? And in doing so, she built a life that wasn't built on guilt, but on grace. Gemini, you are being invited into that same grace. This is not about cutting people off. It's about cutting the cords of expectation that keep you small. It's about understanding that love without truth is not love, it's performance. And you are done performing. You are no longer the bridge. You are the boundary. You are no longer the one who keeps the family functioning. You are the one who reclaims her function as a whole, sovereign soul. And in this space, Gemini, something sacred opens. It's quiet at first, maybe even lonely, but it is clean. It is honest. It is yours. And from this place, you begin to attract differently. You call in people who value your voice, not just your usefulness. You create relationships where clarity is honored, not punished. You find peace that doesn't depend on approval, but on alignment. You stop trying to be the Gemini everyone understands and start being the Gemini who understands herself. That is the ultimate inheritance. Not the family patterns you were given, but the ones you choose to end. So now I ask you, gently but directly, what are you ready to release? What truth have you postponed for too long? What would your life look like if it were shaped around your integrity, not your obligation? Because this is your moment, the culmination of all your inner work, the turning point your ancestors dreamed of, the breath your inner child has been holding, the life you were always meant to create, not in reaction to your past, but in devotion to your becoming. Gemini, you are not the interpreter anymore. You are the narrator now. You are the writer. You are the voice. Let it be heard. Conclusion: a new belonging begins with you. Gemini, what you've just walked through was never just about your family. It was always about you, your voice, your clarity, your truth. The invisible weight you've carried all these years wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Preparation for the moment when you would stop translating, stop softening, stop shrinking, and start choosing. Choosing presence over perfection. Choosing self-belonging over external approval. Choosing to let go of roles that no longer fit and step fully into your own name, your own truth, your own life. This journey, your journey, isn't about being right. It's about being real. It's about honoring your inner compass, even when no one else understands where you're heading. It's about healing not through confrontation, but through liberation. You've come so far, Gemini. From the background of family dynamics to the center of your own story. From peacekeeping to truth-speaking. From shape-shifting to soul-rooting. This is what transformation looks like. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. Soft. True. So as we close this sacred space, I invite you to take a breath. Not the shallow one of survival, but the deep one of freedom. You don't need to explain. You don't need to prove. You just need to live from your truth. And if anything in this message has stirred something in you, trust that it's not coincidence. It's timing. Mercury's timing. Soul timing. The kind of timing that opens portals and rewrites legacies. Gemini, this is the life your ancestors couldn't live, but you can. This is the voice they couldn't use, but you will. This is the pattern they couldn't break, but you just did. Speech balloon, leave a comment below. What truth are you ready to speak? What role are you finally ready to release? Your story might be the mirror someone else needs. And if you felt seen today, if something inside you feels softer, clearer, or simply more awake, subscribe, share this with someone you love, and stay connected. You are not alone on this path. This is just the beginning. Because as you rise, so does your lineage. As you heal, so does the field. And as you speak, the silence finally ends.